Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our GMS Alumni Ferguson Town Hall. My name is Reba Monachin, and I'm here representing our Gates Millennium Scholars as we have a conversation tonight about all of the happenings that have occurred in the most recent months. So I want to welcome you all. Thank you all for joining the conversation. And this group is really excited to have this conversation and figure out how we can
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for our GMS Alumni Ferguson Town Hall. My name is Reba Monachin, and I'm here representing our Gates Millennium Scholars as we have a conversation tonight about...
excuse me. A few technical difficulties here and there, but I'm very excited to be part of this conversation and part of this amazing group of alumni talking about how we can move forward from everything that's happened and how we can be actionable and create positive change as leaders for America's future. If you have questions or comments tonight, please use the hashtag GatesScholarsCare, and I'll be monitoring that hashtag, and please make sure to let us know if you have other comments also on the YouTube page, which I'll also be looking at. So you can do the Gates Scholars Care on Twitter or Facebook or comment on YouTube. So thank you, and I will give it off to our moderator tonight, Lois Moore.
Thank you, Reba. Thank you so much, and thank you, panelists, for being here. I'd like to welcome everyone who's joining us and introduce you to our panel. First person we have is Lawrence Smith. And Lawrence was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, and was an inaugural year recipient of the prestigious Gates Millennium Scholarship in 2000. Delving into his passion for business and sports, he completed his undergraduate and graduate education from Georgia State University in marketing and sports management, respectively. Lawrence became the first Gates Scholar alumnus to join the staff at the Gates Millennium Scholars Program in July of 2010. He served as an outreach coordinator for the marketing and communications team, but was quickly promoted to the relationship manager for alumni relations. We also have with us Tanea Winder. Tanea is a writer, an educator, and motivational speaker from the Southern Ute, Duckwater, Shoshone, and Pyramid Lake Paiute Nations. She grew up on the Southern Ute Indian Reservation and attended college at Stanford University, where she earned a BA in English. After college, she pursued her passion of poetry and received her graduate degree, MFA, in creative writing from the University of New Mexico. Since then, she has co-founded and is the editor-in-chief of As Us, a space for women of the world. It's a literary magazine publishing works of indigenous women and women of color. She is a Gates Millennium Scholars Class of 2004 alumna, who serves as a regional advisor for the GMS Alumni Association Advisory Council. She's a winner of the 2010 A Room of Her Own Foundation's Orlando Prize in Poetry. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Superstition Review, Drunken Boat, Quayle, and Bellevue Literary Review, among others. Her poems from her manuscript, Love in a Time of Blood Quantum, were produced and performed by the Poetic Theater Productions Presents Company in New York City. She teaches as an adjunct professor at the University of New Mexico and the Chicano Studies program. We also have with us Ernesto Villaseñor. Ernesto has been doing some amazing work in his program, helping graduating high school seniors apply for the Gates Millennium Scholarship. So with that, I'm going to let Ernesto give us a slight overview of our town hall tonight. The one thing we want to keep in mind about our town hall is we want to keep it positive. We want to keep it focused on moving forward and what we can continue to do in our communities to stay focused and pursue our goals and what we want to do. So Ernesto, would you like to give an overview?
Sure, definitely. So I am going to be giving first an overview of the Eric Garner case. As we both know, these two incidences happened last year, late 2014 in the fall, summer and the fall, with the Eric Garner case happening in Staten Island, New York, and with the Mike Brown case, of course, happening in Ferguson, not so far outside of St. Louis, Missouri. I'll be talking about the Eric Garner case since I am much more comfortable with that one first. And the Eric Garner case, as many of you may or may not have seen the video, Eric Garner was illegally selling untaxed cigarettes, and the way the whole incident and the issue happened was that police were trying to like prevent him or stop him from selling these untaxed cigarettes, kind of following the broken glass theory in terms of like criminal justice and policing in the community, where usually police, what they do, if they see, I wouldn't say broken glass, but if something bad is happening, they usually act first. So they held him, they did a chokehold, and during this whole chokehold, he immediately started saying the famous phrase that was used as a hashtag, "I can't breathe," which was all recorded. The videos on YouTube for those individuals who have not seen it. And Eric Garner died as a result of this chokehold. Of course, just as in the case of Mike Brown, the grand jury did not indict him for criminal charges or anything of that matter. Although there was enough, well, I wouldn't say, but in terms of the way the interviews and the whole process went, the medical examiner did say that Eric Garner died. An autopsy concluded that the death resulted in homicide. The medical examiner ruled that his death was due to a heart attack resulting from the compression of his chest and prone positioning during physical restraint by the police. In addition to, New York City also had a policy implemented in the 80s against the usage of chokehold when detaining individuals or preventing them from doing any criminal activities. So that's kind of, in essence, what happened within the Eric Garner case. Now, when we go to the Mike Brown case, we have a teenager who apparently, based on the information that was presented, was stealing cigarettes or stole a cigar box from a liquor store. And as he was exiting out with his friend, police, I guess they were trying to detain him or something, but instead of detaining him, they shot at him. They shot him and his friend, and they killed Mike Brown. And rather than the police or forensics examiners coming to pick up his body was out in the street, laid motionless for numerous hours, with a lot of family and friends and neighbors seeing the body out there. And then, of course, just as in the Eric Garner case, the grand jury didn't find enough evidence to charge for a trial to come out towards the police involved in the shooting of Mike Brown. But of course, from these two incidences that happened in St. Louis and Staten Island, we saw a lot of unrest that is ongoing up until today, with a lot of protests. We saw the hashtag that came out, Black Lives Matter, and a lot of individuals, a lot of movements happening across the country. We've seen marches in New York City the minute that the grand jury didn't find enough evidence to hold a trial. We saw a large protest happening in New York City. We saw a lot of unrest. Well, I wouldn't say unrest. We saw a lot of protests and civil disobedience happening in St. Louis and in Ferguson for months on end. And we've seen a lot of protests all over the country. We've seen it in San Francisco. We've seen it in Los Angeles, Chicago, you name it. But we then start looking and we start asking ourselves about questioning the judicial system and the grand jury system and how it helps or hinder us and how broken it is. Then we also have to look, another of the bigger issues is that no charges were brought up against the police who were involved, which also questions the race relations between the police and the community, as well as representation in terms of police being a true representation of the community. And these are some of the big issues that we're going to be looking at through the questions that we have for the panel. I think that's about it, unless anybody else would like to chime in on any information that I might have missed.
Thank you so much, Ernesto. I appreciate that greatly. Just want to ask the panel, what experiences have you had with law enforcement in your communities or outside of your community if you've been traveling, whether it's negative or positive? Could you sort of share that?
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence, would you like to go first?
Oh, sure. I was wanting to be a gentleman and allow for Tanea to go first, but yeah, I'll just talk briefly about a couple of experiences I've had with law enforcement. I've had both positive and negative experiences with law enforcement. I won't get into any specifics, but I have been in situations where I felt either profiled and was pulled over when I lived in Atlanta. But I've also been in situations where I have done community service and been alongside cops doing community service, and it was a positive experience. So I think for me, just in general, as it relates to Eric Gardner and Mike Brown, I have to be honest and say that as a black male that was born and raised in Atlanta, I am more often than not uncomfortable when I have to interact with law enforcement, and it's something that has just kind of been the case since I was able to drive when I was 15, 16 years old. I've just always been uncomfortable, and a lot of times it's just because it's things that I've seen growing up of how they have law enforcement at times have treated people of color unfairly. And so I can say for my experience, just even now as an adult, I've had more negative interactions with law enforcement than positive.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else?
Sure, I can go ahead and share. I think just my early memories I can think of involving law enforcement is just like, being a little kid in the backseat of the car with maybe my mom speeding and her being like, oh man, it's the poppers or something. And then I learned that mentality. That's my first association as a child with police, like, oh, they're bad. Like, if they catch us, how's that going to disrupt it? And then I think maybe my first time interacting with law enforcement was when I was in college and I was driving my friend's car and I did an illegal U-turn where everybody does an illegal U-turn right there. But the cop was just awful to me, and I saw, and I had never been stopped before, so I didn't know if this is how they did it or if that's just what was happening in California, but they are required to write your race on there. And they put that I was Mexican, and then I had to stop him and be like, oh no, I'm Native American, to get him to fix that. But it was just not a good experience, especially. And then when he found out, he was like, well, why are you here? Why are you in the area? And then the whole tension around. I was like, oh, I'm a Stanford student. This is where I live in this area. So I have not had many positive experiences either. However, if someone were to break into my house or if I were being attacked by somebody, the police are the people I would call. So I would definitely say mixed experiences there.
Okay. Thanks, Tanea. Ernesto, did you want to share an incident or a perspective at all?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So as many individuals may or may not know, I'm from Compton, born and raised, and now I live there. So I'd probably say I've had one particular experience where it wasn't all that great in Compton, especially definitely walking out of school, and then usually just walking home. there's always a lot of police activity. Usually police making sure that students walk home safely, as well as because during the time when I was in high school, there was a lot of gang activity around my high school. And of course, they look at me and I'm walking around with my headphones, just with my backpack doing my own thing. And they're asking me, like, where are you going? And of course, I have to let them know, like, I'm walking home. And it's just like, it was just like the way, it's not the fact that they were asking questions, but the way in which they were asking it, as if though I was like, as if though it was like in a very criminal intent, kind of like as if though I was up to no good. So it was this negative intention and whatnot. And not just that, it's also experiences that I have seen, even just walking around and seeing youth who are of my age, who are Latino or Black, just because they're in the bike and they're going towards one direction. If a sheriff patrol car passes by, they immediately, it's like 9 out of 10 times that they'll stop the person riding the bike and throw them in the back of the seat and check their pockets and everything. And they don't really, first and foremost, they don't even read them like, I mean, it's an illegal search and seizure. They don't even tell them like, oh, we're gonna search you and whatnot. They just pull them over and throw them in the back seat, check what they have, and then they usually harass them to see like what you're doing, why you're riding your bike and whatnot. So I've seen a lot of that over time. And even also when negative incidences will happen in the community and they will they will cordon a block off, even just hanging outside, cops would be very, very mean or very like just very bad towards us, like, hey, you better go back inside your house or else I'm gonna arrest you, blah 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 blah. And it's just the language that they use too, really like in a very negative way, where it's just like you either do what we tell you to do or we're just gonna throw you in the back of the seat. And it really brings us, or brought me to question, like, are they here to protect and serve, or are they here to just enforce the law, which are two different things.
Yeah. If I can just chime in real quick, kind of, I don't want to say piggybacking, but just to address maybe a different side of the question that you asked, Lois. I have a friend of mine who I worked with when I was in college, who was a cop, and was a black male from Pittsburgh, and a real good guy. That was probably the first real instance that I had with someone who was in law enforcement. He worked for Atlanta Police Department. That really kind of shared some stories that he had gone through just as a cop. And one thing that I can say is that even though I haven't had a ton of great interactions or experiences with law enforcement, I do truly respect the work that they do, and definitely appreciate a lot of cops that every day go out and put their lives on the line to, protect our freedoms stateside. So, I would like to say that I think sometimes we can get lost in the thought of all of maybe the negative interactions that we've had with law enforcement, but that's not to say that that's representative of all of law enforcement. So I just wanted to, make that comment, to the panel, just so we can also understand it's a different side to it as well.
Yeah. Thank you all for sharing that. I see, so we've had negative and positive experiences with law enforcement, and one thing I noted in your sharing was Tanea and Lawrence, both of you, your incidents were around driving. I once had a friend of mine who, African American, and he said to me, usually when African American men get caught up in the legal system, it first happens when they're driving, in some driving incident. And I had never thought about that. And then as I began to be more observant, I realized, yeah, that's sort of true. And also, like with Ernesto, with what you were saying, I can just be riding my bicycle down the street, and something like that can happen. So it just seems to be a thread that's sort of going through. Lawrence, as you mentioned, positive experiences with law enforcement through your friend. I also have sort of a mixed bag. We have some very close law enforcement people that we're friendly with to the point where they've been to the house for events. And in other cases, we've had to sue them. So it's really a mixed bag with the police department. You've got people who are, like you say, Lawrence, out there putting their lives on the line all the time, and we respect that as citizens. And then there are others who just are sometimes up to mischief in the community, and they give other law enforcement officers a bad name. So as we've shared our experiences with police, and sometimes it can be very humiliating and degrading, and many of us work with communities of color. How do you help your communities that you work with when they have incidents with police that are negative? How do you help them to create sort of a safe healing space to walk them through what's going on, to help them process what's going on, to help them move on from what has happened to them? Would you like to address that?
I don't want to just kind of, I want to give everybody opportunities. Anybody want to kind of comment on that first?
Go ahead.
Okay. I guess for me, I'll say as far as trying to address a situation where maybe someone that I'm close to, either a student that I work with or even just a family member, I think I try to just come to a place of just objectivity where I want to usually ask someone kind of, what was your experience like? Walk me through your experience and what happened. And I try to at least look at it from a standpoint of, you know, was there anything that you could have done differently that could have affected the situation? Was there anything that you felt you did wrong? Was there anything that warranted? And again, this is just from a standpoint of having a conversation with an individual. I usually just want to kind of get an idea of the context of the situation without jumping the gun on either side. And so as far as trying to help an individual maybe deal with or cope with a situation where they may have been either wrongfully profiled and pulled over in a car, or they may have been approached while they were walking on campus or riding their bike on campus. It's usually from just an understanding of knowing, maybe I'll say like knowing the environment that you're in, where you in, you know, like what can you look at from your perspective that maybe you could have done differently that would have led to a different outcome. I usually just try to start at that place, and you know, and then kind of go from there. Not to say that there hasn't been situations where someone truly has just not done anything wrong and was still had a negative interaction with law enforcement, but I usually just try to come into it from a place of understanding both sides.
Thanks, Lawrence. Anyone else?
I'll go ahead and bring in my piece. I guess not just as an educator through the mentorship that I have done, of course, through the social media and the Gates Millennium Scholars and the high school students that I work with, but even as a social science researcher, I really look at the whole notion of restorative justice within the criminal justice system, and really just going about in terms of like restoring or repairing those relationships. Usually it's much easier for us to just jump to the conclusion, like, or have these preconceived notions of the police as an institution, as an oppressive institution within the community. It's much easier for us to just say that and accept that and move on with it, but it's much, much harder to kind of build and restore those relationships between, like, let's say the individuals who are heavily affected by it and also that oppressive actor, as in this case the police community. Usually it really is just, I guess, kind of piggybacking off of on Lawrence, is really asking the youth like the experiences that they have, and going back to the whole social science researcher, just hearing out these oral narratives and picking out and looking at the commonalities among the stories, just to see what trends are going on and to really gain a better understanding of like, how did this happen? What were the outcomes, and what was like the communication or lack thereof between both parties that kind of, I guess, cultivated the instances and whatnot. But it really comes down to more like helping the youth that I mentor just to really look at the bigger pictures, look at like, to do the research and to understand like, why is it that it came to this, like this instance that they have experienced or that they saw happen to somebody else. Like, why did it come to be this way? What led for us to perceive the police in that manner, and vice versa, for the police to see the youth, especially minority youth across the country, as criminals, or the criminalization of youth in urban communities and just in communities throughout the country as a whole. So really just looking at it from an investigative perspective to really see what really is going on in the mindsets of the individuals affected by it.
Okay. Tania, did you want to tap onto that question or wait for another?
Sure. I'll just go ahead and go into it. I think I'll come at it from, I guess, my adjunct professor job. So for me, I try to think more, thankfully I haven't had any of my students come to me like saying something like this has happened to them or something involving police or law enforcement. I mean, maybe it's happened, but like nobody has come to me directly. So for me, I just try to think of the different social situations or like the world that I'm sending like my students out into. And so in my Intro to Comparative Global and Ethnic Societies class, like this is something that I would probably have them look at. Like I'll have them look at real current time issues and try to look at the historical context of that, like what kind of power dynamics are involved, or what kind of stereotypes are involved in that, and look at it from both angles, like just having them see like where was the publication, like what newspaper was it, where are they finding out the information, and then just having them really look at the entire like rhetorical situation of it all, like what's the purpose of it, who's the audience, what's the medium it's coming from, and then if they were to encounter that, like put themselves in that situation, how would they respond? And so it's interesting. I know there's an organization here in Colorado. It's called Colorado Progressive Coalition, and I went to an event they were going to they had a couple years ago when there was like issues going on with law enforcement here in Denver, and they made it into like it was almost like the game of life. Like they had different stations you'd go through just based on like our city statistics of like tickets, or when things went to court, when things were dismissed, when like just like the rates of when officers would let you go like on a violation, or when they would actually like give you the ticket. And so they created this game just based on those odds. And so like you just got like, this is your race, this is your age, this is your level of education, and you'd go from table to table and you would throw the dice and literally just see like where the dice rolled. And so sometimes like, and they had you go through it multiple times, like sometimes you could really just see how the system works against you. We had mentioned earlier about it being broken, and then sometimes like it really was just luck when you got off, like you never knew. But I think just creating those kind of situations in a learning space where it's safe to have dialogue and people can ask questions and people can get mad, and you can talk where that tension is coming from, and have people really work it out mentally beforehand, I think helps better prepare you for when you encounter those situations later on in real life.
So it sounds like building relationships before things fall apart kind of thing is crucial. Building relationships between the community and law enforcement in safe situations, like you say, helping people to verbalize what's happened to them. Sometimes when they go through it, they get a different perspective, and the idea of the restorative justice kind of things, that when it's all said and done, we want to build bridges and build relationships. We don't want to create huge crevices between the community and law enforcement. So where do you guys think law enforcement gets their worldview of communities of color, of people of color, and vice versa. Tanae, I think you mentioned being in the back of the car when you were a little kid and some things that happened that helped to form some ideas of police relationships. And Lawrence, I think you mentioned some things that you had seen happen to friends of yours. Where do you guys think that police get their view, their worldview of people of color? And again, vice versa. Where do people of color get our worldview of law enforcement?
Okay. Well, Lois, to be honest, that's a really loaded question, and so I'll try my best to.
I didn't mean to load it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No, it's a great question. I just, I kind of have to be mindful of how I answer it because I want to make sure I answer it. In my opinion, and maybe this is when I was growing up, to me it seemed that your local police officer was someone that was typically working class, that came from the community in which they worked. And so when I was younger, I would say my perception of, law enforcement, their view of people of color would essentially be, what they saw when they grew up, because they either their father or parents may have been in law enforcement, and then they decided they wanted to go into law enforcement. Maybe they come from a military background and they went from military into law enforcement, but they grew up in the neighborhood that they're policing, so their view is what they grew up in. Their view is what they have been around. And so when I was younger, I felt like the police officers that I saw, they looked like me, because they grew up in the community that I grew up in. So I guess, the kind of first part to answer your question is, I would think that their worldview may be the same as mine because we grew up in the same communities. Now, more recently, as I've gotten older, I don't know if that's necessarily the case nowadays. I don't know if people that policed, the community where I grew up are from that community. So I think that's something that, we would really have to just take a hard look and see the police officers that are going through the academy that are now, serving in their respective communities, where did they come from? Because obviously that would shape their view of not only the world, but of people of color.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely want to chime in on this. I know, definitely completely agree with what Lauren said. Before, when I was young, in Compton especially, initially Compton had its own police force, and it was reflective, and the police force was made up of individuals in the community up until I would say 2000 or 2001, when it got dismantled because of corruption. So then Compton contracted the LA County Sheriff's Department, and of course most of the LA sheriffs are predominantly white. So most of the police force within Compton now is, well, I would say probably like 60-70% white, and then of course you also have 60-70% white and black and Latino, but it's not definitely not reflective or understanding of the community now. And I know the news media and music has a major influence in both of how the police perceive a community and vice versa. I mean, as a kid growing up in the 90s and up until today, I listened to a lot of NWA, and we know rappers that make up the NWA group and other gangster rap, and not just gangster rap, but also hip hop in general has this like preconceived notion of like the police and the whole judicial system altogether as something that is not necessarily positive, and vice versa, just as the music itself doesn't always paint a positive picture of the communities in which the rappers originate or come from. You have NWA talking about F the police just as the same thing, talking about gang and police and gang violence, domestic violence, drug use, and all of that good stuff within the community itself, which could also paint a picture or stamp a negative understanding of these communities that usually is picked up by the mainstream media, and then just turns it as a norm that the police may or may not use or use to their lack of understanding of the communities that they work in.
Thanks, Ernesto, for that perspective. Tanea, did you want to add?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think one of the most frustrating and yet beautiful things about teaching is just this, like, same question: where does a person's worldview come from? And like everyone else, I think it's really complicated. It's a really, like Lawrence was saying, loaded question. But you know, you learn about your world through your parents, through your community, and I think you know, through media, through the things like you're taking in when you're young before you know how to do the critical thinking that going to school, if you have a good teacher, hopefully teaches you. And so I think it's interesting because sometimes I've seen students get really frustrated when their worldview clashes with the way the world views them. And they don't always add up. Sometimes they align, sometimes it's mixed up, and I think that's where having dialogue, whether it's in the community or whether it's in the classroom, to create spaces where we can teach that critical thinking, to create informed citizens, I think is really important. Like, I've seen students come in to class and they'll hear things they didn't know what was going on, and sometimes it will rock their world. Like, that's not how they were raised, that's not what their parents taught them, and it's hard, and they'll get angry and they'll get mad, and then they'll leave, and then they'll come back maybe the next week and be like, okay, I thought about it some more, and I think you're right. But it's teaching them how to dissect those things, whether it's a song they're hearing or whether it's I don't know, news shows that they're seeing on TV or just on television or on the news or in music, like teaching them how to, teaching everybody how to dissect those things from both sides, whether it's whether you're in the law enforcement or you're a teacher and you come to the classroom, or you know, get in your cop car and you have all these preconceived notions. Like, it's a constant battle, and I think you know, we can have good cops, we can have bad cops, we can have good teachers, we can have bad teachers, and it's just trying to get people more willing to, I think, do the work to think through those, I guess, stereotypes that we all have. And I think it's dangerous when we don't address those stereotypes, because it's one thing to talk about and notice and address, like, the violence and the racism that's happening, but it's another thing to think about what are the underlying factors that are the result of that. Where does that discrimination originate from, and how does it get exacerbated? Like, what are all those things about? And it's a lot to unpack. And I keep coming at it from this, like, classroom perspective, but there's a social psychologist at Stanford. His name's Claude Steele, and he came up with what's called stereotype threat. And so it's almost just like, if you know that there's a stereotype out there about you, that your group or ethnicity doesn't do well on tests, that even if you don't ascribe or believe that, like, because the threat is out there, it actually is proven to affect the way you will perform on tests. I don't know if there's theories out there about, like, the same kind of thing of, like, stereotypes about who's gonna, I don't know, do more harm or hurt somebody out there, and how that affects, you know, law enforcement. But just thinking about those things is something I think that needs to be talked more about.
Agree. I totally agree with that, Tanea.
Yeah, and you mentioned dissecting the stereotypes. One stereotype that bothers me as I'm surfing the television mindlessly is some of the police programs that I have not seen on lately, where it's usually Caucasian officers who are chasing down a minority. And I'm wondering, are there only minority criminals out there? And so, again, to take something, and when it upsets us, to be able to sit down, address the stereotypes, as you were saying, Tanea, to dissect it from both sides, to see, okay, what is going on here, and how do these kinds of media feed the stereotypes on both sides that we find. if we want to talk about change, usually we have to talk about policy. That's what makes change. And so if you guys were to think in terms of your own community, communities that you've previously lived in, can you share any policy changes that you would like to see enacted so that we can move forward from this place of hurt and pain that we're in right now, seemingly in the country? Any policy changes you'd like to see enacted?
I think I have something to immediately talk about. Instead of enacting policies, we also have to look at the history of development of current policy trends. Definitely, like the criminalization of drugs and all of that, the broken window theory and whatnot comes from the Rockefeller laws that were enacted in New York State back in the 70s and the 80s, which brought upon heavy penalties and lengthy prison terms for individuals who were in the possession of any narcotics and whatnot. And usually these Rockefeller laws that happened in the 70s and the 80s paved the way for how policing and policy as it revolves to these issues are in play today. They usually are done from guilty until proven innocent perspective among minority folk. As we saw with the Rockefeller laws, they disproportionately affected minorities in low-income communities, and even up until today, we're still affected by these policies today. And usually in these communities, they are the ones that are disproportionately burdened with policies that are unequal, unjust, and are practically de facto and de jure oppression, and for the lack of better words. So it's definitely like just understanding the history of those policies and then going from a notion of understanding the history behind them and going complete 360 in terms of really looking at other policies that are more inclusive of the community, that definitely are inclusive and reflective of the community, and also bring members of the community into a much more substantive role in terms of, like, let's say with the whole grand jury, like what happened in the Eric Garner and Mike Brown thing, where they have a more instrumental role in playing in developing the policies that affect the community. Because usually a lot of the times, a lot of these policies are enacted and there's not enough voice or representation in terms of developing the language or the town hall meetings and what have you, or even the engagement within city council to pass even local ordinances that affect us all. So definitely more engagement with the community is needed in terms of precise policies that we could bring upon. I really can't think of any from the back of my head. I know in California we recently passed Proposition 7, which decriminalized a lot of the possession of marijuana and other things. It not decriminalized it, but actually brought to individuals being tried for rather as felonies, misdemeanors, and other smaller penalties and whatnot. So even seeing that throughout the board would definitely have a big impact, a big positive impact, not just in the community, but also the prison system altogether. So definitely looking at that.
Okay, I like that idea of looking at past policies. Lawrence?
To be honest and frank, I really don't know how much policy will do to kind of change things that are in place now. I mean, so the NYPD, I think it was in 83 or 84, wrote down a policy that said, you know, using a chokehold to detain a potential suspect was something that they banned and outlawed. But it doesn't mean that it's illegal. So to me, a lot of times it has to do with the enforcement of said policy or not enforcing said policy. I think just to try to tackle this from a standpoint of maybe what are some of the things that we can do to invoke some change and to really kind of see change. honestly, from a policy standpoint, that's literally going to have to come from the top, in my opinion. Um, policing nowadays is more militarized rather than from a standpoint of even just the type of uh, equipment that they have access to now. It's more of a military type state when police come to either uh, look at an area where people are protesting. It's not at a state of at least to me, when I grew up, of two cops showing up and trying to figure out a situation and see what's best. Now it's really like they come as if they were going to a war zone, which to me, and just the bigger picture of it, it says so much more. Just to visually see that says so much more about where we're at as it relates to how our communities are policed, and to me, that's just a much bigger issue than policy, I guess I would say. Just real quick, I'll say, from a standpoint of trying to see us get to a place where things can get better, I think we, in general, just everybody, not just people of color, but we have to get to a place where we get out of our comfort zone. We have to try to seek to make friends that don't look like us. We need to push ourselves past the barriers that we hold kind of close to us. Like, oh, I need to be challenged by someone. I need to have a conversation with someone who doesn't think like me, so maybe I can understand a different perspective on how things are in this country. So I want to give everybody a chance to kind of chime in, but that's just my 2 cents on it.
So as far as you're concerned, Lawrence, forget the policy unless that policy has some teeth and consequences.
Yeah, I think that's the tough part. Which
I completely agree. It has to have teeth and consequences. When we desegregated schools, universities, and colleges, that was the policy. They were to be desegregated. But the teeth and the consequences came when that federal money was cut off if you didn't do that.
Exactly.
So again, to have a policy with some teeth and consequences is real important. Tanea, did you want to respond to that one?
I guess I'd have to say I think just coming at it from any and all angles that we can as people, as scholars, as alumni, I think everyone has certain passions and things that they're good at, and that's where we have the most power to create change just as individuals. When Lawrence was talking, for some reason I was thinking about my basketball coach in high school, when he'd be like, well, make sure you're in triple threat, like be in triple threat, because when you're here, like, you can either like go to shoot it, you can pass it, you can dribble it. Like when you're in that triple threat position, like they don't know what to expect from you. So I like to think of us as like quintuple threats or something. Like we have like all these different skills that we can take in like any direction. And I would just say for me as an artist, it's interesting seeing just the art that's coming out of the political and social unrest of the country. I know back in like years ago, there's this book called Theater of the Oppressed by Augusto Boal, and he would talk just about like guerrilla theater. Like there would be artists who'd go in, like if they were protesting minimum wage, maybe they would like just pretend they're customers in a restaurant and then like go into their like acting, and people around them wouldn't know like it was like just theater taking it somewhere. And then to compare that to like what's happening now, with like all the Broadway dancers coming up with like their poem and like dance around I Can't Breathe, and just seeing how like art responds to this situation, I think is interesting for me as a poet and as like an activist.
Great. Sometimes as individuals, we often feel weak and powerless to affect change. And this conversation tonight is about positive change. So could you guys share some successful strategies you've employed to make change in a particular situation? And how did you empower yourself and or empower others?
It's funny that you bring that because as a Gates Millennium Scholars, one of the application essays practically does ask that question that you ask right now. So it does ask of like empowering others and in a time of in times of adversity. So it really, I guess it's really just, I guess from my personal experience, is really looking at helping an first and foremost, helping individuals acknowledge themselves as local experts. I know within social science research, when we go into communities, usually we look at the players who are in those communities as the experts because they're the ones that know the community. They're the ones that know the relationships, the environments, the system. So empowering youth, first and foremost, the youth are at the nexus of change. We've seen it in the civil rights movement. I don't want to call it today the new civil rights movement because the civil rights movement has been ongoing since forever. So we've seen it over time. It's always been the youth leading these changes and asking the questions that bring upon these walls down. So definitely empowering the youth to acknowledge themselves as experts because they know these relationships, they know these communities. So that's probably one of the things that I have done that I continue to do is letting the youth know that they have this knowledge that they would never get in a classroom or in a book. So definitely that, and also the power of dialogues and civil disobedience altogether, whether it may be through sit-ins and whatnot, or even through social media hashtag conversations. Because we've seen, back in the day we had the leaflets and whatnot. Now we have the Twitter handles, the hashtags, the Facebook posts that create awareness about the issues that are ongoing and connect individuals from different parts of from different corners of the world on these similar conversations. So definitely using like social media as a tool for social justice and addressing these issues. And that's definitely like the two most powerful things probably that I could think of that I have used.
Thanks, Ernesto. Anyone else?
I have something. So there's an epidemic of murdered and missing Indigenous women going on in the Americas right now. And I know in Canada there's been over 1,181 women who've been reported murdered and missing. And there's not even numbers available here in the U.S., but we hear about it happening. And something that, and just, you know, my sister's in grad school in Canada, like as a woman, as someone who works with kids, like that really like strikes me hard as something that is going wrong with the world. Like we had a prominent Native American actress who was in that movie August Osage County, and she went missing, and just the lack of police response, like it's all tied into like this, what we're talking about, racism and stereotypes. And so I messaged, you know, one of my friends to say, well, we should do something about this. So we're creating an entire week. We're calling it Sing Our Rivers Red to raise awareness about these issues. And when I say like quadruple threat, I mean it. So like we're bringing up Gates scholar Frank Wong to help us do an awareness concert on Monday in North Dakota. Like we're bringing in different speakers like Ernesto was saying who do local searches and are part of things in the area. And we're even having a panel with somebody. She helped get the first tribal human trafficking policy passed in the MHA Nation, and she has a friend who's who is a police officer and works on that side of things, who helped like bring about the policy change. So it's really just bringing in all these different voices. We're doing like a big earring campaign where people send in like a missing earring to symbolize the missing women, and it's just been amazing monitoring it on social media and seeing how many times the flyer's been shared. And just I'm getting messages from like Oklahoma, California, New York, like high school students who are like, oh, I've seen the flyer, I want to collect earrings. Like this is a great I mean, it's a sad issue, but it's a great, beautiful way to bring about awareness. So it's awesome to just see people showing their support and wanting to share and wanting to help raise awareness about an issue like that. And it all started with, you know, just reaching out saying, hey, I want to do this, can you help me? And finding other people who want to bring to the table what they can to create this week we're going to do in 3 weeks here. So that's like my positive example to share about Gates scholars caring and doing something about what they care about.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about the power of one. That's remarkable today. Just remarkable. Lawrence, did you want to share on that message?
Yeah, I guess when I try to look at things as far as what can we do to move forward from this situation, specifically in the wake of Ferguson and Eric Garner, I try to look for tangible things that people can do, like tomorrow. What can you actually do tomorrow that will start the process of you trying to move forward from some of the injustice that we've seen? And one thing that I guess I kind of have to kind of really just go back to is, one, really kind of understanding the community in which you live in. And when I say that, I mean, do you know who's the chief of police in your community? Like, do you know who's the head of the police department? Do you know who your elected officials are? Do you know who are the people in the community right now that if you wanted to do a protest or you wanted to do a march, do you even know who you would maybe try to reach out to help you with that? Trying to get an idea of what are some of the people. I mean, obviously you see protests that go on in big cities, they get national attention, but what are people doing in that are not in New York? What are people doing just across the country? Different things that they may be doing. Some of it may be town halls like what we're doing now. Some of it may just be, you know what, I want to literally meet with my younger cousins and I want to have a conversation with them personally about, what do you think about everything that's happened? Are you even aware of everything that's going on? And so I think those are some things that, individuals can just take upon themselves to start this process to, again, to Tanea's point, it just may take one conversation that will spark people to action. And I think we just should, always keep that in mind that, I hate to say this, but this definitely won't be the last situation where we may see something that happens that we feel is an injustice to people of color. It definitely won't be the last time. But the thing I think that we just all need to kind of really keep in mind is, what are you doing as an individual? What is your part? What part do you play in trying to move things forward? And sometimes we can just really get overwhelmed with thinking it's just me. I can't really do much. But if you can help spark something in someone else's mind, that's more than doing nothing. If you can just have a conversation with either someone that you could be mentoring or a family member or anything, but don't. I guess what I would say is just more so, I just don't want people to feel like they're really voiceless because it's only one of them. There's always something that you can do to try to, pushing the agenda forward and moving forward with, whether it be race relations, whether it be relations with law enforcement. Just kind of understand the community you live in and understand how you can impact change to the people in your community.
My amazing town hall panel, I want to thank you so much for what you've given to our scholars and alumni. I want to thank you for your participation, Lawrence and Tanea and Ernesto. And as we move away from the town hall and go back to whatever we go back to, remember to build bridges of understanding with people who are not always looking like we look, but to reach out of our comfort zone. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Reba to bring us to a final close. Reba?
Thank you, Lois. So I hope you all enjoyed this town hall panel. And in the next few days, what we'd like to do is continue this conversation. So if you have comments that you'd like to post, this YouTube recording will actually be posted on the same link, so it will be available on the GMS Gates Scholars page. And so you can post questions, you can use that hashtag over the next few days, and you can feel free to add. I'll post my Facebook on here as well as the GMS Alumni Facebook. Feel free to tweet or retweet about this panel, and definitely keep the conversation going. From this conversation, we would love to have some actionable items so that we can create positive change, and we really hope that the community can get together to talk about ways that we can move the conversation forward and really make a difference, not just only within the GMS alumni, but for the entire community and for the world. So hope you all enjoyed this, and we've enjoyed having you all be part of the conversation. There have been some nice comments on YouTube and everything, and via the hashtag. But we will leave you today, and thank you all again.
Thank you.
All panelists.
Thank you.